Hello, and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer in Tel Aviv. This past week, International Holocaust Remembrance Day commemorations took place around the world. In Israel, the Netanyahu government marked the occasion with a special event. The Diaspora Affairs and Combating Antisemitism Ministry chose that date to hold its second annual International Conference on Combating Antisemitism in Jerusalem. Last year, the first conference was the center of controversy, with speakers from Europe's extreme right attending, so extreme that many Jewish leaders who had been slated to speak pulled out as a result. This year, Diaspora Affairs and Combating Antisemitism Minister Amichai Chikli not only invited a who's who of the European right, but spotlighted the United States, President Donald Trump, and the MAGA movement. Haaretz correspondent Linda Dayan was at the conference. She joins me with its highlights and lowlights. In addition, Linda has been faithfully reporting week after week for more than 2 years on the battle to bring the hostages kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th home. This week, that fight came to an end when the body of Ran Gvili, killed defending a kibbutz on October 7th, was returned to Israel. As the yellow ribbons come off and the Bring Them Home posters came down all over the country, people were reflecting on what the hostage saga meant and what lessons were learned. Linda will talk about that with me as well. Our conversation is coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
The ideology is to destroy the West. And for this purpose, they made common cause with the most ultra-anti-Western progressives, and they have united. And they supposedly should disagree on everything, but they don't, because they want to destroy the West. And they agree on one thing. What is the thing that they agree? World War Jew. To conduct a world war, first against the Jews and against the Jewish state. And for the radical Muslims, they are right, because there would be no West in the Middle East if the Jewish state is eradicated. There would be no obstacle for the further invasion of Europe if the Jewish state doesn't exist. And it also appeals to their internal hatred of the Jews, which has common roots with anti-Semitism over the centuries.
Linda Dayan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Linda, call me old-fashioned, but I remember the days when commemorating the Holocaust, fighting against anti-Semitism in the global community, while there was always a political aspect to it, it was something that brought Israelis and diaspora Jews together. It was a uniting force, a uniting fight. But it doesn't seem as if this post-October 7th wave of anti-Semitism has had that similar effect of bringing people together, and especially under this Israeli government, with Minister Amichai Chikli as the Minister of Diaspora Affairs and Combating Antisemitism. So the headline of your article on his conference this week was, "Global Far Right Flocks to Jerusalem to Bash Muslims and Migration at Israel's Anti-Semitism Confab." That's clearly not the kind of anti-Semitism conferences I remember attending as a reporter. Usually there would be many Jewish leaders heading advocacy organizations, rabbis, some heads of state and political leaders, but they were not political events. But this sounded different. So, Linda, you were there for 2 days. Talk about what it felt like to be there.
It was a bit of a bizarre experience. This was a one-day conference surrounded by a few events, and each one of them took on a bit of a different color. But all of them seemed to have very similar overarching messages. On the first day, there was a session in the Knesset in order to kick off the conference with a lot of right-wing and far-right populist politicians from Europe kind of sitting around a table discussing things like migration, radical Islam, the role of NGOs in promoting what became this anti-Semitic outpouring. It was very targeted, and it was profoundly political.
So, Linda, is it oversimplifying it to say that the underlying message of the conference that brought everybody together was, if you want to end anti-Semitism, end Muslim immigration?
I would say that is a bit of an oversimplification, but that is a message that a lot of the European politicians came with. There were panels that discussed the growing phenomenon of right-wing nativist anti-Semitism as well. But there was this idea of we have one enemy, and that enemy is propped up by, the woke left or whomever. And in combating that enemy, we can eradicate this issue of anti-Semitism.
So let's listen to some of the speakers at the conference that you heard and reported on. Setting the tone was Diaspora and Combating Antisemitism Minister Amichai Chikli. He spoke about what he thought were the forces united to harm Jews today.
This conference seeks to banish political correctness, to call a child by his true name, and to mobilize all essential forces in the ideological and physical fight against the modern hires of the Nazis, who are now committing horrific massacre against Kurdish minority in Rojava, Syria, against innocent civilians in Iran, and against Jews and Christians across the globe. This is not merely the fight of the Jewish people, it is the fight of the free world against the imperialism and tyranny of fanatic Islamism, against mass slaughter and rape, against horrifying barbarism, and its attempt to buy off influence and decision makers worldwide. We will not be silenced in the face of these atrocities, and we will not allow Islamo-Nazism to achieve its goal. Never again.
Linda, the focus of controversy around the first anti-Semitism conference held last year was very European. But this year, there was a lot of attention paid to the presentation of an award to a dead man, Charlie Kirk. Who was Charlie Kirk, and why did he get an award?
Charlie Kirk was a right-wing commentator who rose to prominence on college campuses in the United States. He led an organization called Turning Point USA, and it was very aligned with a lot of the ideals we now see in the MAGA right. He was also a staunch supporter of Israel. During the conference, they presented a sort of supercut of highlights of him debating people on college campuses about Israel and him defending the country, the war, its actions. He also championed theories like the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which is the idea that migrants are being brought into America in order to unseat white Americans as the source of power. And in most iterations of that theory, it is the Jews who are doing so, who are leading the charge of bringing in migrants to upset that order. And he has also spoken about how secular Jews and left-wing Jews are a source of many of the problems that the right faces, or as he sees it, that America faces. But in just being such a staunch supporter of Israel and having been assassinated late last year, the government saw fit to present him with this posthumous award. The award was accepted by his pastor, Rob McCoy, who delivered a speech that was rife with these notions of Christian nationalism. It was very much Jews being God's chosen people and the ideals of Christianity coming from Judaism, and to hate Judaism is to hate the bases of our society. And at one point he said that Charlie Kirk understood that the real enemy is Islam. And until then, And after then, a lot of speakers, not all speakers, but a lot of speakers had moderated their tones and talked about Islamism or radical Islam or political Islamism. But he was the first person of that event, and this was the kickoff gala, to say that the problem is Islam. The problem is the way that Islam functions. The problem is the way that Muslims as a community work in society. And that was a very chilling moment, I think.
And watch this communism and secularism eroded the moral foundation of Western civilization, which is the Decalogue. In the decay of this moral foundation, these young people, especially heterosexual males, were put at the bottom of the totem pole of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the pendulum swung, and they became bitter. And so they looked for another target other than themselves, and they picked the 15 to 16 million Jews worldwide and decided to blame them for all the world's ills. While secular progressivism destroyed the moral foundation of much of Western society, Islam, and it's my opinion, and you may disagree with me, I see Islam not as a religion, but as a political structure disguised as a religion.
One interesting thing you reported on, Linda, is the fact that the split inside the American right over Israel and anti-Semitism made it into the conference, including the conversation about Kirk. How did that subject come up, and what was said about it?
Most of it surrounded Tucker Carlson, who, if listeners don't know, he is also a right-wing commentator. He was a friend of Charlie Kirk. He eulogized him even, who took a similar nationalist right-wing line and then eventually mixed it in with anti-Israel and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, which has been a very recent pivot. And we're seeing that quite a bit on the right, the so-called woke right. We're seeing it from Candace Owens as well, who is in the same circle. There was an entire panel to discuss this fracture within the right. And there were a couple other speakers who tackled it. Some of them said that it is the tribalism of the left that is penetrating the right and has caused this breach. Others were saying that, you have to follow the money, and seems like he's being paid by new handlers, so to speak. But all of them have recognized that this is a problem and it is growing. They had different ideas of how to combat it. One of them talked about, we need to expel the grifters, and we need to expel these people from our own communities. It is on us to do so. Another talked about building bridges and inroads with the more nationalist stream of the right in order to bolster Jewish Republican or Jewish right relations. But it is something that is consuming this particular wing, and it is something that they're very concerned about.
So it's interesting, there was no mention of the neo-Nazi brand of anti-Semitism in Europe, the far fringe right brand, because a lot of those people were there, right? So there was little discussion of right-wing anti-Semitism in Europe, but the topic came up in regard to America, in regard to the new wave of right-wing anti-Semitism.
I should say there was a wee bit of mention of that particular brand of European anti-Semitism. It was a bit of a blip in one of the panels on radicalization that featured a lot of the far-right politicians. And they said that one of the politicians had opposed, even though his party supported it, a ban on kosher slaughter. But the way that they would talk about these ideas, the way that they were framed in the European context was saying we were really just going after halal slaughter, and kashrut got kind of bound into that. And we must understand that Islam and Judaism function very differently, and these three religions have very different value codes. But at the end of the day, it had the same message, which was, we shouldn't be afraid of these people. They're our allies. They want to be friends with us, and we should embrace the people who do want to give us that support, especially when that support is dwindling in the world.
Linda, what is the Red-Green Alliance? In your reports, you said talk of it proliferated at the conference. I personally had never heard of it before.
I even saw some people had brochures talking about it at the main event. The Red-Green Alliance is a name that is given to this partnership between Islamism and what you could almost call a extreme traditionalist or radical branches of Islam, and the communist, socialist, or generally the far left. This idea of the Red-Green Alliance was mentioned by a lot of speakers. One of them was Janos Boka, who is a Hungarian politician who really laid it out that it was a imported idea of the imported woke left from America and the imported Islamism of the Middle East and North Africa. Sebastian Kurz, the former Chancellor of Austria, also discussed this unlikely partnership and talked about how absurd it is. But it's really consuming. It is talked about a lot in relation to Palestine protests, where you would see people who are proponents of Sharia, extremist parties like Hamas and Hezbollah.
So the green is Hamas and the red is communism?
Exactly.
It's not about Christmas decorations.
Unfortunately not. It should be said that it is a real thing, that there is this partnership does exist within certain spaces, and it should be talked about, but it should not necessarily be framed as the primary driver of anti-Semitism in the world as we know it, or the only thing we need to defeat in order to solve this problem.
As the member of the European Parliament from Poland, Dominik Tarzycki, said, the solution is zero illegal migrants. That's his political motto. That's really putting it very simply.
Yeah, and he really emphasized it, the idea that if we end this illegal immigration, or if we end migration period of people that they would rather not have in their country, that this and all of the other problems will go away. It should also be noted, and this was something I found fascinating, is that he's talking about zero illegal migrants. Just the idea of illegal migrants shows that there should be zero of things that are illegal. This is already something that their government is tackling, which really shows, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't fully end these phenomenon. And once you do, in this hypothetical world in which, there are zero Muslim refugees in these countries, who will these far-right parties go after next? Okay, they've ended halal slaughter and it's no longer a concern. What are they going after next?
So it sounds like there's a mingling of fighting anti-Semitism with a fight for Western civilization, or the fight, for Europe to not be conquered by the Islamists. And, you bring me back to Netanyahu saying World War Jew. It seemed like the Israeli leaders throughout the 2 days that you watched them interact were endorsing this worldview.
Very much so. I think Amichai Chikli really set it up from the beginning when he discussed how radical Islam is the inheritor of Nazi ideology, which is how he opened the conference on Holocaust Memorial Day by going into the gory details of the last months of Auschwitz and then talking about how much Muslim leaders at the time endorsed it. It seemed to be something that they absolutely backed.
So, as you wrap up and try to figure out what you walked away from this conference believing about how this Israeli government sees the world, sees fighting anti-Semitism, sees the legacy of the Holocaust, what kind of a conference they were brought together, what are your conclusions and how do you feel about how the Israeli population reflects on these issues?
I'm still digesting everything that I experienced. And something that I walked away from is the idea that these problems that they're talking about aren't imagined. There really is, especially in Europe, and we just saw it in Australia, a big issue with political Islamism, Islamic extremism, and anti-Semitism. It has been feeding it, and we can't pretend that it isn't. That violence is something I've experienced myself, and I'm not going to say, this isn't a problem, because it absolutely is by every measure. But we can't just sit in a room and say the problem is Muslims and leftists and leave it at that and hope that it goes away by cutting all funding for NGOs or by, putting a stranglehold on the media, or even just having more Holocaust education in schools, although it would be great to have more Holocaust education in schools. When you're just talking to yourself, you can't come to a meaningful conclusion. And that's a lot of what this conference was doing. It was the right to the far right, the populist wing, talking to itself, patting itself on the back, having a few hard conversations about, say, Tucker Carlson and the fate of Jews in the Republican Party. And that was really nice to see. but without any representation of, even allies on the left, say in Germany, and countries where they're, very much open to having these conversations. Just the lack of any representation of that kind of makes it a moot point.
Do you feel like after October 7th, though, again, we're sitting in a country with more than 20% of our population not being Jewish, the vast majority of which being Muslim, that there is, under this government particularly, but maybe among the people, more of a Venn diagram of people who are villainizing Islam in general, just the way that these Europeans and Americans are?
I do think so, especially after October 7th and especially after this sea of anti-Semitism we've been seeing. Part of the issue is the way that the media covers what's been happening in Europe, the tide of anti-Semitism and what it looks like. The attacks that we've seen recently, which many of them have been the result of Islamic extremism. And as more and more of us feel so abandoned by the world, especially in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, and feel abandoned by the left and feel abandoned by liberal elements, a lot of people are clinging to anyone that they can see as allies. And if these allies are peddling this message, and the message is already overlapping with this worldview of, well, the people who are trying to hurt me here are also trying to hurt my family over there, it lands and sticks a lot more easily.
Linda, on a slightly more hopeful note, I can't have you on the podcast, someone who has been faithfully there in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, week after week, month after month, year after year even, covering the battle, the grassroots battle of the Israeli people for the return of the hostages who were taken captive on October 7th. Some of them taken captive alive, some of them deceased and brought over after they were already killed. We record on the day of the funeral of Ran Gvili, the last hostage returned. Yesterday, there was a big ceremony in Hostage Square, stopping the clock that was counting the minutes, seconds, hours, and days since October 7th. There are so many aspects to how the Gaza war has changed Israel, affected our society, but just zeroing in on the hostage saga for a moment, what kind of a milestone do you think that represented for Israelis, and what kind of lessons do you think we've learned from it?
It's been huge, and I think there's no way to downplay the enormity of it. I think it was the single most unifying factor I've seen since I've been in this country. I came in 2014. Just the way that the public made this their cause. At the very beginning, these events were very much not under the auspices of any official body. It was all extremely grassroots, and it became something that people really dedicated themselves to. People came out on Saturday nights with the regularity that you would only see of, say, like religious Jews going to synagogue on Saturday mornings. It became a form of communal practice, almost, where people can come together to believe in a singular thing.
And they had Shabbat services there, right? They had at the beginning Shabbat, and they had at the end of Shabbat there were also rabbis there doing prayers.
I went to 2 consecutive Megillah readings at Hostage Square. It also became a literal center of the community where if there was a major religious or cultural event, you could go there to experience it and be surrounded by people who were also not forgetting this particular cause and holding it dear to their hearts. I think so much of the Israeli response to October 7th and what we take away from Israeli society after that terrible attack is the hostage movement, the way that the country rallied around the families, or depending on your politics, a very particular fringe villainizing these families and using them as political pawns.
The vast majority, though, I saw were fighting on a political level, but in a weird way, it transcended politics. They were fighting for the ethos, the traditional Israeli ethos of never leaving anybody behind, that we are all united and don't leave anybody behind. And again, it took on a political cast because it appeared that some members of the government, or pretty much this government, was willing to leave these people behind in order to serve what they saw as a wider goal of total victory or making Israel a more secure place. And it was the people of the country standing up in the streets and saying, no, these people's lives, these individuals' lives, are more important than any greater goal you might have.
Absolutely. And time again in the speeches in Hostage Square, you would hear from the very beginning, this isn't just a battle to return our daughters and sons and parents and grandparents. This is a battle for the values of the country. This is a battle for the version of the country we want our children to grow up in and we want the next generation to inherit. And that was a constant through line of, this isn't just a fight for the return of people. This is Israel. This is the version of ourselves that we want to be.
So it was very interesting, right, Linda? On the very same day, this conference was happening with one kind of message. And simultaneously, really in the same moment, there was the gathering at Hostage Square, which was like in a different world, a small country with many, many aspects.
As I was listening to all of these right-wing politicians talking about restricting immigration or how to keep messages of America Firstism out of their parties, I was just thinking like, oh gosh, I wish I could have been at that clock-stopping ceremony at Hostage Square. I feel like the whole country was hungry for that hopeful euphoria, which is such a balm, especially in comparison to what we were seeing at that conference, so much of which was stoking fear and panic. And having something like that to celebrate, I think, is a really beautiful thing.
Well, Linda, thank you for covering both sides of the coin in this case, even though you can't be in two places at once. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Linda Dayan, and to producer and editor, Adi Shacham. If you want to continue to listen to the podcast and never miss an episode, please subscribe to us on Apple, on Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And leave us a 5-star rating and a comment if you wish, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.